Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert Buxton. Great to be back. And what I want to do first, I'm going to play classical music. I'll discuss it, explain the history of it and everything. But, I like to improvise very much. And I especially like doing odd combinations of things. So, for example, with odd combinations, I'll tell you a story. I had a teacher in high school for French class, French teacher in high school. And the way she spoke, you wouldn't expect she'd be a French teacher. I grew up in New Jersey, so she says, hello everyone, welcome to French class. And everyone was, we thought, she's from like Brooklyn or something, I don't know. And then she says, I was born in France, grew up there, came here when I was 20. So anyway, let me start speaking French. And she just speaks this rapid fire French. Bonjour classe, je m'appelle Madame Lafayette, blah, blah, blah. And everyone's like, am I going too fast? So the point is, you can do these things in music too. And I have this idea, I'll take, let's say, the theme to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, right? And I'll play it in a Southern gospel style, if that makes it. I just want to try it. So let's see what that is. It's going to be like a silly thing. So, yeah. Thank you. All right, now, in all seriousness though, I want to do something more serious. So, welcome. Yeah, that was the theme to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony in the style of country gospel.
Right on the tip of my tongue.
But in a gospel style.
In a gospel
yeah,
style.
That's like the joke.
Only the bum from Jersey could do that.
That's what they call me around here. I'm the bum from Jersey, you know that? So now I want to play a piece that's a bit more on the sad side. This is from Gluck's opera, Orpheus. Gluck was an opera composer in Vienna who lived in the mid-18th century. And the story of Orpheus, it's the famous Greek myth. Orpheus' wife, Eurydice, dies. She goes to the underworld. And Orpheus rescues her. But Hades gives this one condition. He says, don't look back. If you look back, you lose her forever. Unfortunately, he did look back and loses her. It's quite a tragic story. The opera ends with a more positive, ending. At the end of the opera, they change the story. Eurydice comes back and they live happily ever after. Now, I'm going to play this famous melody from the opera. It's very mournful, and it's an arrangement by 19th century Italian composer Giovanni Scambati. So this is Gluck arranged by Scambati, the melody from Orpheus. Thank you. So that's Gluck's melody from Orpheus. It's a very sad piece. Beautiful, but sad. Now I'm going to play something that's familiar, but in an unfamiliar adaptation. This is Ave Maria by Franz Schubert, or as we call him down south, Sherbert. Sorry, I can't help a dad joke. I'm sorry. Now, I don't sing, I'm sorry. I wish I could sing, but if I were to sing it, you'd probably expect me to sing it in Latin, because that's what usually Ave Maria is sung in Latin to the Hail Mary prayer text. But that's actually not how Schubert wrote it. This is something you can tell some friends when you have dinner with them tonight. Tell them, well, did you know Schubert used a different text? It was also a prayer to Mary, but an excerpt of Sir Walter Scott's poem, The Lady of the Lake, translated into German. That was the original text of this song. I didn't even know that until I read about it last week. Schubert died at the age of 31. 31. And he was very ill for much of his life and wrote many things, especially in his later years. When he wrote this piece, by the way, he would sometimes compose 3 or 4 works in a single day to write as much as he possibly could. And, you know, it's just unthinkable. When he died in 1828, he was penniless and completely unknown, except for a small group of friends in Vienna. But it was after he died, Franz Liszt came across his music and started performing it in his early recitals. In many ways, that's why we remember Schubert today, thanks to Liszt. So what I'm going to play is Liszt's arrangement of Schubert's Ave Maria. You're not going to hear Liszt so much until the middle and end of this, because what Liszt does is in the beginning, he leaves the piece alone. He doesn't add so much to it. So it sounds like the original song, you know. But here in the second verse, you hear what the right hand is doing, all those, you know, that ain't Schubert. That's Liszt. He added that in. And why he adds it in is because a singer sings different words for each verse, and there's variety that way. But if I'm just playing it on the piano and I play each verse the same notes, it might get a little boring. So Liszt changes things on each verse. That's the idea. So this is Liszt's arrangement of Ave Maria by Schubert.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you. So that's Schubert, arranged by Liszt, Ave Maria. And you see how he changes it around. I mean, he adds some things. So this subject of arrangement, this arranging or arrangement, transcribing, I'm sort of obsessed with it because it's a route with which I can play music that's not really for the piano. And now I'd like to play two of Robert Schumann's Paganini studies. These are originally works for solo violin by Paganini. Paganini was the Jimi Hendrix of the early 19th century. I'm not kidding. He was like a rock star of that time, a wild man, and very controversial too. People thought he was possessed. The Romantic generation, they were a little younger than Paganini. They were so impressed by him that they started making their own, renditions of Paganini's music, especially Robert Schumann in the 1830s. Robert Schumann he had bipolar disorder, which was not understood so well at that time. They didn't have medication for it. And he suffered a great deal in his life with his condition. I feel you can hear it in his music sometimes. Like, for instance, the first arrangement I'm going to play, it really sounds quite manic. The original piece is sort of an exercise or study for the violin by Paganini. No, that's the original piece. It's for the bow going between strings and whatnot. But what Schumann does is he transforms it into his own voice. And it sounds to me, it's like somebody who's talking fast without pauses. That's what this piece sounds like. I mean, and it just goes like that from start to finish. There's maybe one or two spots only where there's a comma or a semicolon or a breath. The rest of the time, it's just relentless. And this is a characteristic sometimes of people with bipolar. Now, bipolar disorder, people who have it are oftentimes, like Schumann, brilliant. And it doesn't make him, as some musicians, they say, oh, Schumann, he was crazy. He wasn't crazy. He was a very good person, a good father, a good husband. Wagner was crazy. That's different. Schumann just had this condition. So here is the B minor Paganini Caprice arranged by Robert Schumann for piano. Thank you. The next one, you can hear something very depressive, very sad in the beginning and end, and then more manic in the middle. So you truly hear both sides of his bipolar disorder, frankly. The beginning sounds like resignation to me. It sounds like somebody even sighing, like it's just... It's beautiful, but it has this elegy feeling to it. But the middle is sort of like the last one. It's very manic. It's very, a lot of notes, really. That also, somehow, with the left hand and the right hand playing these parallel things, it sounds like Bach. And Schumann said that Bach should be your daily bread. So he knew what he was saying. I mean, he was very influenced by Bach. All the Romantics were. And this is interesting because Bach died in 1750, but like Schubert, was unknown virtually during his lifetime and for at least 70 years after it. It was only later in the 19th century that composers like Mendelssohn and Liszt and Schumann, they started to really take Bach seriously, and he became the central part of the canon. Part of this, the reason for his not being known, was actually his sons. His sons were composers too, and they were sort of more successful in their own lifetimes, financially or whatnot, than their dad. They led a musical revolution against their dad's style. I don't know if that sounds familiar. Intergenerational conflicts. Nothing really changes. So this is the piece. This is the E minor Paganini Caprice arranged by Robert Schumann, or piano. Thank you. Now I'm going to play something from Schumann's later years. Like that was a young Schumann who wrote that. He actually wrote that in an extended manic period. You know, I mentioned he had bipolar disorder. So that was a manic period that he was in the 1830s. Partially the result of the fact that he couldn't marry Clara Wieck, the daughter of his piano teacher, Friedrich Wieck. He didn't allow it, the father. You know, the father said, don't marry this Schumann guy. He's a real bohemian, beatnik, bad influence, you know. I don't know if he said beatnik. They didn't have them in the 1830s, but whatever. So finally they got married. And I think Schumann's music and he himself calmed down quite a bit when he got married. That was, of course, when he couldn't get married, he wrote that music, what you just heard, that arrangement of Paganini. So there's this interesting thing that in their lifetimes, Clara, who became Clara Schumann, she was much more well-known and more famous than her husband, Robert. And by the way, people are starting to play Clara's music more nowadays. I should learn some of her music. I fully, admit I haven't yet. But look. But she would be traveling across Europe performing. And he, by the way, he damaged his hands. He injured his hands, practiced too much. So he would be home with the kids. They had 7 kids. And he was a very involved father, didn't look at it as a chore. Actually, he looked at being a father as a way to relive his own childhood. So much of his music in his later years was influenced by childhood. This music I'm going to play now, it's called Abendlied, Evening Song. It's from a set of works called Music for Children Young and Old. He wrote this many things for children or with the subject of childhood. Sadly, he started to deteriorate. He heard voices, and he tried to jump into the Rhine River in the middle of February. Some fishermen rescued him. Then he was in an asylum for some time, died at 46 there, Robert Schumann. So it's just a real tragedy. And you might expect that the music that he wrote then was tortured and anxious or whatnot. It's the opposite. It's completely calm, like this piece. It's almost scary how calm it is. Too much calm is not good. I have a friend who's over 100 years old, and I saw him around Christmas, and he was in that strange calm. He wasn't feeling good, and I was just sad. I didn't want to say too much, but I felt sadness. And then I saw him again earlier in March, and he looked happy and back to his usual self. I said, you look great, how are you doing? He said, you wonder why I'm better. I said, yeah, well, what happened? He said, I got into 2 arguments with people this week, and it lifted my spirits. I said, well, that's interesting, but not that I recommend that, but just that too much of that calm, like this piece. You know what they say, like a pond can be dirty because the water doesn't flow at all. Whereas a stream, water is. This piece, it's like that pond. It's just eerily calm. So here is the Abendlied by Robert Schumann. No, I didn't like it. Those quiet things are the hardest thing to pull off. So. I think he's saying goodbye there. That's really what it feels like to me. I want to play you now a piece by Franz Liszt. I did Liszt, one of his arrangements earlier, but Liszt, I adore Liszt. I wish I could have met him. I mean, all of them I wish, but Liszt was extroverted. He was larger than life. He was quite a personality, and there's so many sides to Liszt as a person, as a musician. There was Liszt the arranger you heard earlier. There's Liszt the virtuoso performer. He was, by the way, modeling himself after Paganini. He was also like a rock star at that time. And there was also Liszt the religious side. You know, he was a devout Catholic. He tried to become a priest sometimes. It never quite worked out. There's a story, he was at the Sistine Chapel trying to get ordained, but there was a piano there, and he started playing. And unfortunately, all the nuns fainted, and the cardinal kicked him out. He said, you're not, because, you know, Liszt had these two sides. One was a very worldly side, and then the other was a very religious side. Now, this piece is from 1849. He wrote it right after Chopin died. They knew each other. Liszt outlived all his friends. Mendelssohn died at 38. Chopin died before 50, as did Schumann. And Liszt had a much longer life, so he outlived them all. You know, this is the Consolation number 3 by Liszt. The word consolation, consolation, comes from poems by Alphonse de Lamartine, who was a French poet at this time. Now, this piece, I think it's a tribute to Chopin, because he writes it in Chopin's style. It sounds like Chopin. Let me show you what I mean, you know. It sounds like a nocturne by Chopin. And what better way to pay tribute to a friend than by writing something in their style? You know, it's funny because Liszt admired and learned from Chopin a lot, and not so much the other way around. Chopin, I read some of his letters, and as great of a composer as he was a kind of acidic person, I have to say. He looked down at Liszt. He thought Liszt was a showman. And there's a story about that. Liszt was playing some of Chopin's music. And of course, Liszt added lots of things to it. That's what they did in those days, by the way. They didn't play it like it was written. That's a modern idea. But I guess Liszt added so much to it that Chopin angrily told him, if you're gonna play my music, play it. You know, so, but still, Liszt, I think Liszt learned a lot from Chopin. I think he learned lyricism and introspection from him, because naturally Liszt was a showman, extrovert, but he picked up from Chopin and also Schubert, you heard earlier, that inward looking, that soft, you know, music. So that's what this is. This is, for Liszt, uncharacteristically introverted music. So Consolation number 3 by Liszt. Well, now I'm going to play a piece that you might not like at all, and you might not like me too much after I'm done with it. This is a piece from the middle of the 20th century, and it's quite dissonant. It has a lot of things like this, and like this, and like this. But it has so much character and so much depth that it's worth playing and worth hearing, really. If you look at modern paintings or 20th century paintings by Picasso, Jackson Pollock, well, this is your musical equivalent of that. This is the Paganini Variations by Witold Lutosławski, Polish composer, from 1941. Now, the theme from Paganini is from the early 19th century. You've probably heard it before. Well, but what Lutosławski does with Paganini is very different. But here's the story behind the music, because I think that all the dissonance and the oddity of the music will make sense knowing the story. Lutosławski was an officer in the Polish army, and when the Second World War broke out, the Polish army, of course, collapsed. And he walked back to Warsaw. By the way, his brother died at the front, probably killed by the Nazis. Maybe the Soviets, but probably the Nazis. This was before it was, they were fighting over Poland in the beginning. Well, Lutosławski walked back to Warsaw, and to make ends meet, he played piano in bars with his good friend Andrzej Panufnik, another composer, avant-garde Polish composer at this time. And in the daytime, they would give concerts of popular music, arrangements of popular music. But what they really lived for were for these concerts in the middle of the night where they'd play their music. And these were strictly illegal concerts because totalitarian regimes do not accept music or painting or poetry that's in any way avant-garde or different or strange. They don't accept that at all. Well, there's a story about this. They were giving a concert, probably playing this piece, and the SS walked in at 3 a.m. and they put pistols to their heads and said, "This concert and this music is illegal, and we will shoot you now." Well, luckily the bartender came out and said, "Look, these guys work for me. Don't touch them. Their music, the reason their piano playing sounds like that, they probably had too much to drink. Just leave them alone." The SS walked away. This was what life was like in Warsaw at that time. And so that's the conditions in which he wrote this music. When Warsaw fell, Lutosławski managed to take with him only one piece of music he'd written up until then, and it was this piece. So the Paganini Variations originally are for two pianos. And then in 1978, years later, he arranged it for piano and orchestra. And what I've done, maybe recklessly, is to arrange it for one piano. And sometimes I feel it's too late. I mean, it's impossible to do, but it's also too late to go back. If you're swimming to an island and you're 3/4 of the way there, you can't swim back. You have to go all the way. So that's kind of what it is for me. So as I said, it's not easy listening. I'm giving you a big disclaimer, but listen for the character of the music, always. Because every variation has character and is like a snapshot into that world at that time. I mean, I can see rubble in this music. I can imagine these fascist marches, just the grotesqueness of it all. You hear it there. There's a cynical and acidic sense of humor in this music too. And there's one part that sounds like a Polish folk song. Just one moment like that, which maybe is like hope, but just for a moment, and then it goes right back to this really wild music. So here it is, Paganini, Lutosławski Variations. I'm sorry, Lutosławski, Paganini Variations. What am I saying? Thanks. Yeah,
Thank you.
it's something. And I was initially very, very afraid to play this for people because I thought it's too, I don't know, heavy but I always get interesting reactions. People will tell me things like, it sounds like current events today, unfortunately, or it sounds dystopian, or because whatever the case may be, it's a powerful, powerful piece, and it's from, the context in which he wrote it is just unbelievable. So on a very, very different note, I want to play you some gospel music. And the reason I play a lot of gospel is that, I have two immigrant parents. My mother is an immigrant from the Soviet Union and raised me on classical music. By the way, I grew up in New Jersey. Now my whole family lives in the faraway place known as Chapel Hill. Well, this is Chapel Hill, so what am I saying? Down the road, really, not that far from here. My Russian mother and my father, who's also an immigrant, but he's from southeastern Virginia, immigrated from there. And he raised me on the old gospel, the Opry and all of that. So I grew up with these different kinds of music always in my ears. So this is an old gospel tune, Where Could I Go But to the Lord? Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. I'm going to head over to the other area. So we did everything from Schubert and Gluck and everything to gospel and avant-garde Polish music. So a lot of different things today. Thanks for having me, as always. I'll see you later. Thank you.